Hello, Akili Rose here. This is my book of Ladies and Cowboys. So I've decided to do a reading of the book. At least the first 5 chapters. I might go ahead and do the whole thing. I'm not sure yet. Still debating. We're going to see how this goes. Now, I am not a professional. You're going to hear background noises. You're going to hear my bird. I'm pretty sure you can hear him right now. You might hear the dog. You might hear people talking. You might hear a vacuum going. That's just going to be how it is. This is a free thing. I'm not going to put a ton of effort into it. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to put a ton of effort into it. I hope you can understand. There will not be any music in the background. If there is, it's totally on accident. But just be aware that this is just going to be a really simple reading. I do have a bit of a stutter. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I figured this might be, something fun to do and a good idea for, people to check out my book to see if they actually like it. And, well, without further ado, my book. Alright, so this is Of Ladies and Cowboys by me, Akili Rose. We're gonna skip all this boring stuff. Dedications, if you would like to read them, I'll just scroll through them pretty slowly and you can pause. There's quite a few of them. This is the disclaimer. If you want to read through it, I will scroll slowly through it. You can pause. The only things you really need to know about this is that it is not a historical fiction book. It is not a Wild Western book. Everything in this book is made up. On top of that, there are adult themes such as violence, death, swearing, gunfights, hostage situations, kidnapping, general abuse, and other such things. On top of that, there are some sexual themes in this particular book. If any of these are an issue with you, I do suggest finding a different book to read or just preparing yourself for it. The Lady and the Cowboy. 3 seconds ago, I was falling off a mountain toward my impending death, or at minimum, a looming future of permanent disability. The next thing I knew, I had landed hard on soft ground, winding me. I coughed as I tried to draw in oxygen, but instead of the cold and damp early spring air of Mount Evans in Colorado, I was hit full blast by dry and painfully hot air. The terror that I had been experienced from my fall left my mind blank and confused. Moments ago, I had been getting drunk at my boss's silly Wild West-themed birthday party. He had booked our entire department a tour over the mountains to the party venue, a nice little patio overlooking the sheer drop down the side of the mountains. I got along well with my coworkers, but not my boss. I immediately went for the drinks. Being a lightweight and trying to stay out of my boss's way had led to, well... I sat up as my vision swam and my heart beat nearly out of my chest. I felt like I was starting to sober up from fright alone. But when I tried standing, I found I was unsteady on my feet. A vast desert wasteland filled with dried-up bramble and surprisingly vibrant green cacti was all I could see anywhere around me. There was nothing else except hilly landscape and boulders. A hot breeze swirled playfully around me as if welcoming me to this new reality, immediately drying out my skin and making my throat itch something awful. Goosebumps formed on my arms while at the same time my body began to sweat. Where the hell was I? The yellow plaid shirt I had been wearing for the party was quickly soaked. The sun beat heavily down on me as I looked around again, my head protected by a silly polyester cowboy hat. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans for my phone, but only upon finding it missing did I remember I had left it in my car. This can't be real, right? I muttered, spinning around in a circle. There had to be a door, a hole, a portal, an alien spaceship? Something, somewhere, right? Had I fallen through some freaky sinkhole and ended up on the other side of the world? However, no matter how I looked, there was nothing that proved I had ever been anywhere else other than the spot where I just slid down the sandy slope. Lottie Simmons, what have you gotten yourself into? What do I do? It appeared that I had been possibly transported to a different world. Aside from the wind and my increasingly heavy breathing, it was unnervingly silent. There were no planes in the sky, no rumbling tires on pavement. It was the uncanny silence of being alone in the wilderness. The place I was in, trapped in a loop of disbelieving and increasingly anxious circles, was some sort of dried-up riverbed. It stretched and curved out of sight in 2 directions, but it was deep enough that my alcohol-befuddled brain could not see any easy way up the slopes. In one direction, the ridge rose high enough I could call it the area miniature canyon before it veered off in another direction. The other way, while not as steep, had all sorts of bramble and other debris piled up within that would make traversing it difficult. I never much enjoyed hiking anywhere other than up a paved tourist trail. I could enjoy the outdoors within the confines of modern convenience, and that was about it. As I finally decided I needed to get myself out to higher ground, I tried to figure out the best route to get out of the riverbed. Before I could truly make up my mind, however, I began to hear something. The ground seemed to be trembling as much as I was, and there was a noise of, well, it was impossible to place. I had not heard anything like it before, but something was coming toward me and fast. I did not have the time to think any more. I needed to act. The sound came from the direction of the clogged up section of the river. Without thinking, I started to run down toward the canyon, the opposite direction the sound was coming from. As the walls of the canyon rose up to a point where I knew there was no way to climb up, I began to doubt my choice. The sound behind me started to get closer, louder, and I suddenly realized what it had to be. It was the roar of rushing water. I was trapped in a riverbed with a flash flood roaring down to greet me. Fear overtook me then. I was in too much shock from my fall and the sudden change in scenery to really act before, but now I was terrified. I glanced back over my shoulder just in time to see a wall of water tearing apart the debris behind me. My legs nearly gave out and I stumbled into a wall. "Someone, anyone, help me, please!" I screamed desperately. My fingers dug into the rock as I tried to find handholds, anything to grab to get up and out of the way. As water started to rush toward me, deepening rapidly, something flashed in the corner of my vision, looking an awful lot like a snake. I jerked back in horror instinctively. When I actually turned to look, however, I found a rope dangling at my side. I had never climbed a rope before in my life, but I suddenly found the strength to do it. I grabbed at the rope with both hands and started to pull myself up. With my hands sweating and blood starting to trickle down my nails, just holding on was a mighty enough feat for me. The water was right behind me, and I laboriously forced my weak arms to hold my weight. My boots and ankles got buffeted by the water, mud, and plant debris. I kicked my feet about wildly until I managed to get a foothold and kept climbing. What felt like forever passed as I struggled against gravity to stay out of the rushing water below me. A shadow loomed over me, and I felt something grab the back of my shirt and a fistful of my hair before I was yanked upward, and then dumped unceremoniously in the dirt at the top of the riverbed. I could not find the strength to move for a moment as I curled up around myself, tears streaming from my eyes, unable to catch my breath, whispering muffled thanks. My savior did not seem to have moved from the edge, or if he did, he didn't make a sound. I was covered in dirt, tears, and sweat, but at the moment all I cared about was the fact that I was still alive and not being drowned under rushing water. The person who had come to my rescue was patient and quiet. As the water rumbled below us, the only other sound I could hear was my own strangled gasping. I was overwhelmed with a mix of terror and relief, to the point I could not focus on anything other than drawing air into my lungs as waves of panic washed over me. I was not sure how much time passed before I shakily pushed myself up out of the dirt to thank my rescuer properly. I lifted my face to see the long legs of a white and brown horse standing a few feet away, grazing. It had what I assumed to be the rope that had saved my life tied to a leather harness that was strapped across its chest. It seemed to feel my gaze and lift its head to peek at me, but I uneasily turned away. Horses brought back bad memories, memories of a shattered childhood dream, and broken ribs. I clutched at my side that throbbed with phantom pain. The injuries had long since healed, but the memories had not yet scarred over. Behind me, someone coughed lightly, and I heard footsteps approaching. Not just any footsteps, the classic sound of leather boots on dirt, and metal spurs that every American should know instinctively. I quickly moved to face the figure behind me, just as he stooped down. A man, dressed entirely in tight black clothing, was reaching a hand down towards me, his face shaded by a black hat. Bright blue eyes looked down at me coldly, his expression carefully blank and frozen. From under his hat fell strands of black hair, and his tanned skin made me think he had some Native American blood in him. He had a large rifle strapped to his back, and another smaller handgun in a holster at his hip. He moved slowly and with masculine grace that would have brought butterflies to my stomach and redness to my cheeks under different circumstances. He had to be a cowboy. I was instantly mystified. Even though I did not immediately respond to the offered hand, the man waited without moving. Those bright eyes peered down at me, looking directly into my own. I forced myself to snap out of my trance and grabbed his hand with mine. His fingers, covered in black leather gloves, wrapped tightly and firmly around my hand, and he helped me stand. The trembling in that hand, at least, was contained for a bit. Thank you, I managed to say. My voice was rough and cracked, not wanting to come out properly. He did not seem to care at all, as he simply nodded and released me. As soon as I was steady enough to stand on my own feet, he took a step back and moved toward his horse. Panic set in as I watched him reach for the reins. Please don't leave me. I don't know where I am or how I got here. I'm begging you, I cried out, scrambling toward the pair. The horse jerked its head in surprise, its ears flattening against its skull to express its keen displeasure, and I froze. The man watched me for a moment, his lips tightening into a thin line before he shook his head. I won't. His voice was low, gentle, and smooth, flowing like a river of molten chocolate. I shivered, reminding myself this man was a stranger and probably already annoyed by me. He didn't need me drooling all over him. I glanced at the horse, who had returned to peacefully grazing. The man made no moves to get on the animal, and instead began to search through one of the saddlebags. After a moment, he pulled out a black cloth and approached me. He held it out, clearly indicating for me to take it. It was at that moment I realized I must have looked like a mess. Blood rushed to my cheeks with embarrassment. I swiftly took the offered rag and turned away to at least get my face a little cleaner. I heard him move back towards his horse as I did so. As soon as I brushed dirt and tear stains off myself as best I could, I hesitantly stepped closer to the two. The man had untied the rope from his horse and was neatly coiling it up. His horse, in turn, seemed not to mind my approach this time and completely ignored me as long as I moved slowly. "Excuse me, Thank you. My name is Lottie Simmons. I'd really appreciate it if you'd be willing to help me some more. I can pay you once I get home or to a bank if you'd like," I sputtered out. The man finished his work before he responded. He kept his expression cleanly blank and his eyes on the rope. I could not help but to think he was weighing his options of dealing with the mess that was me or leaving me behind. I could not blame him. "Killian Sinclair. Can you ride?" he said after a few seconds. He finally looked my way, and I peered nervously at his horse before I shook my head. It was a lie. I had spent a good part of my childhood riding until I'd been kicked by a fellow student's self-trained horse. After that, I had never really gotten over my fear of the big animals, despite a fierce affection for them. Killian glanced over at his horse thoughtfully and then pulled the reins up over its head, interrupting its meal. "You'll have to learn," he told me sternly before adding, "Latana won't hurt you. She only looks mean." I knew he was making an attempt at comforting me, but with everything else going on, I wanted to refuse. I actually dared to turn to him and open my mouth to say I would just walk as he rode, but when I did, I found him staring me down. I realized this was not something I was allowed to say no to. He was going to take me with him and would be riding his horse. "All right," I squeaked. Killian nodded and put his rope away on the saddle. Latana seemed to know they were about to move again as she sighed loudly. She shifted out of her lazy stance and tried to nose at her owner. I clenched my shaking hands into fists and took several tiny steps toward her. True to his word, although the horse flattened her ears again, she did not make any threats toward me. Killian got down to his knees and cupped his hands. It was a stance I could still remember from my listens as a kid. Forcing back the nausea that was bubbling up in my stomach, I hardened my expression and placed my foot into his hands. With Killian's help, I found myself seated in the saddle of the horse without any trouble. He hopped on behind me with ease and kicked the horse into a fast walk. I could not help but glance over my shoulder at the active riverbed, wondering if I should have just stayed to try and find a way home. That was Chapter 1 of my book of Ladies and Cowboys. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. The book will be out March 1st, 2024. It has both a paperback and ebook version.